Just before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to quickly share something that might interest you, especially if today's conversation has got you thinking about your own sustainability work. Some of the things we hear most in this industry are, I wish I could connect with other people doing this work, or I'd love to turn my sustainability expertise into something more. Well, 51 to Carbon Zero, the sponsor of this podcast, have created their own referral network. And it does exactly that. This isn't about selling you something, it's actually about helping you make money while building the sustainability community we all need. So here's what's in it for you. First, you get to join a genuine community of sustainability experts who share knowledge, refer work to each other, and solve problems together. So, no more working in isolation. Secondly, there's real money involved. There's 10% plus commission on software referrals. We're talking about projects that go from 30 grand up to 100 grand. Plus, you'll be able to boost your presence by taking part in our fireside chats. I've actually got an email in front of me from Louise Stevens, one of the ambassadors, and it says that all her clients are genuinely happy because she's got a great partner and her clients love them. But here's the bigger picture. You'll be helping accelerate the sustainability transition that we all desperately need. Every referral, every connection, every collaboration moves us closer to the world we're all working towards. If this resonates with you and you want to earn some extra income, click the link in our show notes to become a 51 to Carbon Zero ambassador. Okay, back to the show. Welcome back to the Green Element podcast, where we feature business leaders and innovators transforming their operations to be more environmentally and socially sustainable. I'm your host, Will Richardson, and I can't wait to meet our guest today and help you on your journey of sustainability. Abena, welcome to the Green Element podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about legacy events and, what you do there and how you've actually managed to, steer your way through this COVID-19 pandemic.
Hi, Will. Thanks for having me. My name is Abena, and I'm really happy to be invited on the Green Element podcast today. So thanks for having me.
No problem. And so how long have legacy events been around?
Legacy has been around since the autumn of 2016. So we're about 4.5 years old now. The time has absolutely flown. And in that time, we've gone from being a one-man band, me, and I started Legacy by myself as a sole trader, and now we're a small team of about 4 and still growing. So it's been a really exciting journey.
Brilliant. And if we could touch upon prior to the events that have been going on recently with COVID, etc. What kind of events were you orchestrating, and what kind of could you tell us a bit about your day job? Because we all know what events, but we think of conferences or festivals, or what were you doing?
It's a really good question. I ask that myself all the time. What am I doing? So Legacy is a sustainable events agency and consultancy. So what that means is that we help companies organise in-person and now virtual events whilst considering the sustainability of the event. So its environmental impact, its carbon footprint, and its potential for positive social change. So on the one hand, we organise events, and we do this to act as a showcase for other event professionals to show that sustainable events don't have to be lesser. They can be as high quality, as beautiful, as inspiring as other events where sustainability hasn't been considered. And then we also act as a consultancy as well, because sadly, my small team can't organise every event in the world. And we really want to empower other event professionals and people working in the events industry to help them understand what they need to do to reduce the environmental impact of their events. So we want to help event organisers create positive experiences without the negative impacts.
Okay. And do you have a genre of events that you work with, or do you work with any events?
We do tend to work with any events, but mostly those for businesses. So that tends to include conferences, workshops, seminars, that kind of thing. We also work on festivals as well and community group events, but primarily events to do with businesses as opposed to private events, so weddings and that kind of thing.
Okay. And you're a scientist by background, I believe. So does that does that help you with when you're talking to event organisers? I would imagine within the science, maybe in the science fields, because they'll go, "Oh, you actually know what we're talking about." Whereas if I was doing it, they'd be like, "Oh gosh."
I think my science background has so many benefits to working in the events industry. I think, first of all, because sustainability can be such a daunting subject and it covers so many areas that can be quite complex, like climate change and carbon emissions and water use and waste, I think sometimes it helps event organizers be able to talk to me because I understand those concepts because I'm trained in those concepts, but I can relate them to the events industry and talk about them in a jargon-free way, in a way in real English. So I'm able to communicate those concepts in a non-scientific way. And I think it also helps as well because being a scientist, I feel data and evidence is really important. So I really like to challenge some of the theories around sustainability and make sure that what we advise at Legacy is evidence based and data driven. And also that it's practical for event organizers. So you won't ever find me or my team giving out vague, fluffy concepts like be green. We want to try and, put some of the kind of evidence behind what we're doing. And then I think it also just makes me more credible and my team more credible because we use theories, we use evidence, and so we know what works really, and so we try and bring that to our decisions as well.
Brilliant. And you said you set it up, what, 4.5, 5 years ago. What were you doing before this?
Yep. So I'm a true eco warrior. I have been since I started my career. So before I started Legacy, I worked at an architect's practice, so helping make new buildings and then also new cities and new developments more sustainable. I've also worked in a social organisation as a sustainability manager, so trying to empower the community to be more sustainable as well as work on the buildings and spaces that they worked on as well. I've also worked as a consultant in sustainability, so I've helped lots of corporate organisations, EU organisations, the UK government with their sustainability. And I've also worked directly in renewable energy. So I used to help develop wind farms and solar farms. So I've got a really solid grounding in energy efficiency and sustainability, but particularly with respect to the built environment. So for me, everyone always says, "Well, you worked as a scientist and you did all these jobs, and then you went to events. It's so different." But to me, I don't see it as any different. I've always specialised in the built environment, and that's where most events are held. It's just instead of looking at long-term solutions for the built environment, I'm looking at temporary events in the built environment. But the same principles still apply.
Brilliant, brilliant. And that sounds like you've done a huge amount. How long have you been working in in this kind of field industry for?
I'm going to give away my age, and as I mentioned, I've worked in various parts of the industry, but since about 2003, actually in university as well, I've worked in sustainability and trying to reduce our environmental impact. So,
Brilliant.
yep, I have a lot of experience in this sector.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. I think it's really useful, and I think that I'm kind of veering off a bit of a tangent, but you talk to people in some quite large organisations, and I do not mean this disrespectfully whatsoever, but there are some people that are in fairly senior positions in quite powerful organizations with 2, 3 years experience, and they're making decisions that have quite serious ramifications for the future. And it does worry me slightly because you do need to have experience and depth to a level of thinking when talking and pushing sustainability forward, because of the some because some decisions aren't just as quite shallow; they actually do have quite deep kind of ramifications, I guess.
Yeah, I agree to a certain extent, especially as sustainability is a word that it covers such a range of issues, like I mentioned, from energy to water to waste to ecology. And it's hard for anyone, no matter how long they've been working in the field, to become an expert
Mm,
in all of those issues. But it really does help to have a grounding in at least a couple of issues so that you're speaking from data and evidence, as I mentioned before. But as a scientist, I can also say that, and it's the environmentalist mantra as well. Scientists often get frustrated because they present the facts and then they don't understand why people aren't acting on the facts. And we see that at the moment with COVID and the vaccine. I mean, to scientists, to epidemiologists, it seems obvious that everyone should get the vaccine. And, I can see many people get frustrated about those who have alternative views. But one of the reasons I moved into events is because I realized that education isn't really the issue. The issue is mindset and changing mindset and behavior. And that really requires a skill and ability to work with people, understand people, and be able to change minds. And so, yes, having a lot of experience in the sustainability industry is important, but I think more important is the ability to be able to understand people and really make decisions that can and really lead. So be able to lead and make decisions and bring people along with you, I think, is the key to changing the world as we're trying to do. That's
yeah.
a humbling lesson for me as a scientist to realize that doesn't matter how many graphs I show or how many tables I show of data. That's not what's going to change things.
I think, you've been doing this for long enough to remember what it was like talking about climate. I mean, the fact it's now called climate change, for example, it was called global warming, but you had too many people going, well, it's not getting hotter where I live, so therefore it can't be global warming. It's like, what about the word global before the word warming? Okay, well, why don't we change it to climate change? Because it's kind of the same but different. And I don't know. And the science was absolutely there 25 years ago, 30 years ago, but we chose to ignore it. And I think it's just, yeah, the fact that we're now waking up. And I actually don't think it's science that's changed people's opinions. I think, I think you're right. I think it's behavior. It's, seeing what's around them.
Absolutely, and that's why I think events are so important. Like I said, I'm loath to say as a scientist, but I really feel that events are the most powerful tool humanity has to change these things. I mean, all of the big changes in the human condition have come around because of big events. And I'm not just talking about, the ones we all know, like Live Aid and Bob Geldof and that kind of thing. I'm talking about events like COP26 coming up, like events back in the 80s and 90s, which led to a lot of the legislation we have being made. Events really are, in my opinion, the most powerful tool that we have to do this. They're important and they're often undervalued. I think people think events are frivolous and,
Mm.
it's what we do to party, but they're not. The ways we bring people together, I think, are important for driving change.
Knowledge sharing places,
Yeah.
aren't they? So that takes us nicely into how do we get together when we can't physically get together? What do events look like now?
So for the last year or so, like everybody else, Legacy and the Legacy team have been trapped in our homes, and we've really transitioned from being an in-person events agency to a virtual events agency. And we didn't do that solely because of the pandemic. Because sustainability is so fundamental to what we do, we've been talking about the virtues of virtual events for a long time. And that's because inherently virtual events are more sustainable. And that's a fact. I love events, obviously, by what I do. I love in person events. I love meeting people. But it cannot be denied that in terms of carbon emissions, virtual events are 97% they have 97% less carbon emissions. In terms of waste, they're much more sustainable because obviously you're not generating waste from people staying at a destination, eating and drinking there, etc. And they're also more sustainable socially as well. The social sustainability is often left out of the equation when we're talking about this subject. But I'm sure we've all seen over the last year, virtual events are so much more inclusive. And I mean that in many ways. First of all, you can communicate and engage with people globally in a way that you never could before. I went to a conference, an online conference last week, and some of the speakers were giving case studies from Kenya and from New Zealand. And I would never have had the opportunity to speak to those people in the world before COVID, whereas now it's easy, it's just a flick of a switch. But then also, in-person events often exclude a lot of groups. So often, for example, carers or people with caring responsibilities are unable to go to in-person events. People on low incomes are unable to go to in-person events. And so a lot of groups who perhaps were excluded before are able to access virtual events. And so that can only be a good thing for sustainability in the social sense.
Mm. I think, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, totally spot on. And I think, and how, like, to someone listening to this, what does a virtual event look like? I know we were talking about it prior to this podcast, but could you explain what a virtual event looks
Yep,
like to someone?
of course. And it's still evolving. I feel like we're still at the stage perhaps the industry was, if you if you're old enough like me to think back to the early days of mobile phones, and we thought mobile phones were these huge brick-like objects that we held to our head and shouted into. Um, and you look at where mobile phones are now, you see how quickly the industry has evolved in those, I suppose, 40 years. And so with virtual events, if you think of where we are now as the shouting into the mobile phone 80s era, that's where we are. But essentially, a virtual event is an event that's held entirely online or on the internet. And it still can incorporate elements of a traditional in-person event. So if it's a conference, it still can have keynote speakers and networking and that kind of thing. But it's really its own entity. It's a completely new way of communicating and engaging people. And we're still finding out about that. And I find that really exciting, both with my scientist hat on to really explore, okay, so taking the principles of what makes an event, how do you translate that online and make it successful? And also just because it's exciting to be here at the birth of a new industry and seeing where that goes. I think there's some of the potential with augmented reality and AI and VR are really quite exciting.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, absolutely. And because when we were talking before, we were talking about in person and virtual, and you said it's bad. It's not, well, you can't compare. It's a bit like comparing theatre to, I think you said theatre to cinema, didn't you? And I liked that. I think that made a lot of sense because they're very different. And because I was in, I was speaking at this event and they had this VIP section. If people can visualize this, and you clicked on this VIP section on the tab, and then you had this map of different tables that came up with seats, but you could see that seats were taken by people, and you saw which ones were free, and you pressed with your mouse on a chair in a table, then you got brought into, we've all possibly been on Zoom rooms or in the virtual rooms, and you just brought into a room with people, and you started just chatting to the people, and you was like, oh, sorry, would you mind if I sit down here? And it was, you kind of joke about it, but they're like, of course they're going to go, yeah, it'd be kind of weird if they went, no. I'd be like, oh, okay. But no, they were really nice. And we just chatted a bit, and I would never have met these people, and I was sitting in my shed in the garden while I was doing this. And it just made me really realize that virtual events can actually be pretty phenomenal experiences. And you've got to have the same, you've got to have the same mindset as you would do to when you go to a conference. Although I think a lot of people don't have the right mindset when they go to a conference. They still try and multitask, but almost more so you can't multitask when you're going to a virtual event. You literally have to go to your seat, your chair, and sit there from 9 to 5, possibly go for lunch, but not have meetings, not be phoning people, but really be present at that moment in time. And I think you could probably get quite a lot out of a virtual.
I think so. And with the legacy team, we're really determined to show that a virtual event can be a really worthwhile experience. So we've done a lot of research on different platforms and applying the right platform to the right kind of event. And I think a lot of people think that a virtual event is just a long Zoom. They're often forced to go to them by their company. So, they're sat at the computer. One ear is sort of on what's happening on the Zoom. The other is doing their Sainsbury's online shopping list. And then they're not fully engaged, where as you said, a virtual event is not the inferior cousin to an in-person event, which we're going to ditch as soon as we get back into the world. It's a completely different format of engaging people. So the way to approach it is to tear up how you ran your in-person events and start again. If you try and pick up your 4-day, all-day conference and turn that and put that online directly, so the same length of sessions, the same number of speakers, the same content, it's probably not going to work because virtual isn't designed for that format. But if you think creatively as to what is an event and what's the point of this event, what do I want my audience to do I want them to meet each other and network, am I communicating some information? So if you go back to a blank piece of paper and start from there and then design your virtual event, you end up with moments like the one you experience where you end up on a table with people you don't know and the technology enables you to chat to those people in a way you probably wouldn't do in person. So those are the benefits. And I completely agree. We ran an event looking at sustainable transport last summer, and some of our guests included people like Tesla and Virgin Galactic speaking. And at an in-person event, if you wanted to go and speak to the person from Tesla, you can imagine how difficult that would be. There'd be a long queue of people to speak to them, and you might feel a bit nervous. All of those barriers are removed online. I mean, you're on the same level. There's much less hierarchy. You're on the same level as the chief
Yeah.
exec of Virgin Galactic, and that's a real opportunity for businesses and for networking. It's just about how you apply the tools. Yeah.
And are there lots of platforms out there? I mean, I guess a lot of this is based on software. And if you're listening to this and you work or run an organization and you're thinking, I wouldn't mind putting on an event, how, I guess, come to you. I'm answering my own question.
Come to Legacy. We'll show you.
But how do you work out where to go and what to do? And are there much better ones out there? Are there, because you talked about the long Zoom, and my other half is getting back to OT work at the moment, and she's been on a few conferences, and I put them in inverted commas because actually it's been quite a lot of just Zoom calls, and I think that's sadly what a lot of these are still. They're not. So how do you know what to do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And again, it's where I think you should start in that question I said, what is the point of this event? So I'm not knocking Zoom or Teams or Google Meet or whatever your online meeting platform of choice is. Going back fundamentally to what an event is, you're trying to bring people together. You're trying to allow people to connect. And the technology is a tool to help you do that. So if you have a small group, for example, a Zoom or Meet works fine for that. For small meetings, perfect. In the same way, though, as you wouldn't try and run a huge global conference in your company's tiny meeting room, when you start to scale up or start to think about bigger events, Zoom and Meet and Hangouts are generally not the right tools for that. And there's a whole plethora of platforms and they all have pros and cons. So some of the ones that we use include Hopin, which has been in the news recently because they've received an awful lot of investment funding. We use Remo, which is the one I think you alluded to earlier, where you clicked on a chair and it suddenly took you into a networking
Right.
space.
That's so funny that you actually recognise. I wouldn't have a clue what platform it was.
We do this all the time, and that's the skill of the organizer, that you weren't even aware what platform it was, but it obviously was designed in a way that you just knew what to do.
Right.
We use Swapcard as well. We use Run the World. We work with so many platforms. We want to try and stay platform agnostic so that we can really be objective in applying the right platform to the job that needs to be done. But yeah, there are whole loads. If you think outside of your Zoom, there's a whole world out there with virtual platforms that do really cool things. And some of them now are starting, like I've mentioned, to incorporate VR as well. So they are mind-blowing in what they can achieve in terms of the experience.
Would you need VR headsets in order to have VR
It
conferences?
depends. Some of the fuller platforms you would need a VR headset, although these days with the Quest, which is much more cost effective, that's not so prohibitive anymore. But some of them
Sorry,
where
what's a Quest? You just
sorry,
mentioned something I haven't a clue on.
So the Quest is a VR headset put out by Oculus, I believe, and it's about £300 or something for a headset, and that allows. So if you know any teenage boys, they're probably all all over this already,
Oh,
and they're
really?
spending their evenings playing together on that. So it's not something that everyone can afford, but it's not as cost prohibitive as some of the other headsets, which cost multiple thousands only 5 years ago.
Right.
But
Okay.
if you're not willing to invest in that for all your attendees, which I imagine not everyone is, there are still augmented reality type features that some platforms incorporate. So some platforms try and create a whole 3D experience as well. So you can almost recreate a stadium or recreate going to a theme park or whatever experience it is that you want to do within the platform using augmented reality. And that doesn't require a headset.
So, I mean, you quite rightly brought up earlier that virtual online conferences open up to the attendees, and there are many more people that are able to attend from all over the world, from all different demographics. I guess the same is in place for the people that are wanting to put on these conferences as well, because I guess for smaller organizations, not for profits, that have a very good, model, and they are doing so much good that actually it would be really good if lots and lots of people heard about them. But the thought of putting on a real life conference would be terrifying because of the costs that are involved. And I would imagine there's a lot of upfront fees that are involved on the real life conferences, because you've got to make sure that caterers are turning up, make sure that etc. 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 It must be much more cheaper to run an online conference.
Not necessarily, sadly. If you think of it as a straight analogy, so for an in-person event, your biggest cost is probably going to be your venue, whereas for an online or virtual event, you still have a venue as such, but your venue is your platform, and some platforms do cost more than others. So some platforms which do have some of the really innovative features that I've mentioned, at the moment they do cost more. So there is a cost to putting on an online event as well. And then obviously some of the other costs you don't have, like catering, for example. But another significant cost for an in-person event is to provide your delegates with some kind of souvenir or goodie bag or giveaway or something like that. And a lot of companies still want to do that for their audiences, even when the events are online, because it helps with their brand recognition, and also because they recognize that their stakeholders are just fed up right now and they would appreciate a nice gift. And so there are costs to that as well, and environmental sustainability impacts as well. So it's not entirely impact free running a virtual event, but generally it's a lot more sustainable and it's a lot more accessible, as you mentioned. And the real benefit I think that some charities and not-for-profits and organizations like that have is they're really connected to their audience anyway. They have a purpose, they know who they want to target, they know how to talk to those audiences, and that translates really well to putting on any kind of event, whether it's in person or online or virtual.
Are there organizations that, because I would imagine these platforms say they cost £10,000 a month or whatever, because there is, I would hazard a guess, running a software company myself, I would hazard a guess there's an awful lot that goes on behind the scenes, and it sounds expensive, but actually if you actually knew what was going on, you'd be going, oh wow, there's that much to have to do. But are there companies out there that almost have the software that they rent it and then they subcontract it out to people? So therefore almost they would be taking the hit. So it would be up to them, because they would say, right, well, we'll take 20% of all ticket prices. And if they have an organization, they're like, you're never going to get enough people. I'm sorry, we're not going to take you on as a client. Are there companies out there that do that?
Yeah, there's so many. Like I said, we're like at, the kind of the tech bubble in Silicon Valley. That's where we are with virtual event platforms. So I'm finding it really interesting looking at the different business models that are emerging, and I'm not quite sure which one's going to win out yet. I don't really know. So the business models range from kind of like you mentioned. So some companies will produce a platform that can be white labeled. So the platform has all the features, but a company can then brand it in the way that they want. And the company can buy that platform outright, but obviously the downside of that is they then don't have any future maintenance, or they can subscribe to this white labeled platform and then they get the benefit of updates all the time. So that's one model that works. Another model, I mentioned Hopin, who I think are now worth £4 billion due to recent investment, which is unheard of in the events industry. And their model is that they have a relatively cheap model for organizers, which is something like $100 per month to use the basic features of their platform. But then they also have an enterprise rate as well that bigger organizations can take, and that allows the bigger organization to customize the platform. It gives them more access to event support. So that model is now becoming fairly common as well, and it remains to be seen if that will work. And then other platforms, the model is a bit like Eventbrite, the ticketing platform. If your event is free, you can use the platform for free. But if you charge tickets for your online event, they'll take a percentage of your ticket price. And so, yeah, I'm not quite sure yet which model is going to work. And also, early days, there's quite a low barrier to entry to developing online platforms at the moment. It's not like with a hardware company where there's a capital investment needed to, source your items, set up your supply chain, that kind of thing. With an online event, if you're fairly tech savvy, you can go a lot of the way to developing a platform. And because there's a low barrier to entry, that means that I think we're going to see the next 2 years really becoming quite a competitive space.
I've just realised, for most people that listen to this podcast on a fairly regular basis, I've not asked any of the questions I normally ask.
I want to tell you about climate change.
I found it really interesting talking to you about, would it be possible if we kind of delve into a bit about your organisation and what it is that you do? How do you engage staff, suppliers, and customers with your mission and purpose?
So, like all companies, we've had to evolve in the last year, but a lot of the fundamental principles we had at Legacy have shown to be really resilient and worth following. So, for example, like I mentioned, I've worked in sustainability a long time, and I'm a big fan of practicing what you preach, in particular, well-being and having a work-life balance. So from the beginning, Legacy has been a 4-day-a-week company. We work Tuesdays to Fridays. Obviously, if there's an event on, we work Mondays as well because an event has a fixed deadline. But generally, our office hours are Tuesdays to Fridays. And I feel vindicated taking that decision right from the beginning, because you can see now that countries like Spain are now looking at a 4-day week, and the UK government is too, to show that in terms of productivity, people who work 4-day weeks are just as productive as those who don't. And we also have the benefit of having longer time to recover and recuperate. So practicing what we preach is really important to us. And then with our customers as well, the way we engage with them is just by being really honest and really open about what we're trying to achieve, but still sticking true to our mission, which is to make the events industry more sustainable. So we try and offer advice and expertise to our customers and guide them to their goals, but without guilt or judgment. I feel that a lot of people with sustainability switch off automatically when you try and guilt them into making decisions. It's just not effective. So we just try and make sure that we're speaking the language, we don't use guilt, and we're just really honest about what we're advising. And we also try and be as cooperative as we can in the industry. I really feel that the only way we can change is by working together. And so we do a lot of work. We volunteer a lot of our time. We offer a lot of our tools. We set up an online discussion forum as well that's free to access for anybody, called the Green Room, where people can discuss the issues with sustainability and events. So we try and be really generous with our time to show that yes, we are a business, but fundamentally we do believe that the events industry can be sustainable, and we're all working towards this common goal.
We'll put a link to the Green Room. That sounds really good. I'm definitely going to go into it as well. But we'll put a link on our podcast page. And so when it comes to running an ethical and sustainable business, what would you say has been your biggest struggle so far? And can you tell us a bit about how you've overcome it?
Yeah, so it's a difficult question. I think staying true to our values has probably been our biggest struggle. It's anyone working in sustainability will know that there's always a trade-off with the decisions you make. So I mentioned earlier social sustainability being important, but obviously climate change is probably the biggest issue we face. So how do you balance the need to bring people together, to bring decision makers together in person, because that's the best way humans do make decisions, but also balance that against the need to understand that expecting people to travel increases carbon emissions. So there's a trade off there. With the social thing, how do you balance the fact that bringing people together is wonderful for local communities if you can feed into those local communities, but again, you're contributing to more waste problems, to more carbon emissions. So that there's a trade off there. Um, in our work, we really like to use sustainable venues, so venues that have demonstrated that they have a clear commitment to improving their environmental impact and their social impact as well. Unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of these venues tend to be in the middle of the countryside and lovely rolling hills where they have the space to be able to move forward their goals. But venues in the middle of the countryside are often quite difficult to access by public transport. So, how do you balance the need to want to use these venues because they are true examples of sustainable venues, but you can't use public transport to get there? So, yeah, I think the most difficult challenge is just understanding the trade-offs with sustainability and just being clear on what it is you're trying to achieve and just being honest about the trade-offs that you're making.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, uh, you say you work for a 4-day week. Have you had any customers or clients, I guess, complain about it and go, you don't work very hard, or what's the reality of it? Because because I'm with you, I think that it's kind of obvious that it's fine.
We've had absolutely no pushback at all, and I think now post COVID we will have even less pushback. So it helps that we've done it from the beginning, so we don't know any other way. I mean, my team, we've had jobs before. We've worked in organisations where we've worked a 5-day working week, but at Legacy, no issues at all. We have a small note in our email signatures to say don't really expect emails from us on Mondays.
Mm.
We communicate that to our clients as well. Like I said, if an event is coming up and we need to work on a Monday to deliver the event, of course we will work. That's the same as people who might, need to work on a Saturday every now and then for their work. But generally, no. And when we tell people, they're really understanding, and actually they think it's a really great idea. I think it's one of those business decisions that it seems daunting and impossible to implement, but once you've done it, you can't imagine any other way. You'd never go back.
And do people work, say, 10 hours? Because I used to work in Canada in running a restaurant in a ski season, and they had you work 4 days a week, but you work 10 hours a day, 4 days a week.
I am a bit of a workaholic as the founder of Legacy, so I need to take my own advice. But we try really hard not to work long hours. So the working week is 9:30 to 6 p.m. and we do not have anything scheduled outside of those hours. My team is then free to do what they like. So yeah, it's a reasonable working week. We don't try and make up the hours that we lose on the one day on the remaining 4 days.
Brilliant. And if you could offer one piece of advice to our listeners to help them with their purpose, what would that be?
That's a really difficult question, and I think it's one that I've really had to grow into myself. As I mentioned before, I was a scientist and thought that if I beat people over the heads with all of my facts, then they would change. Excuse me, and that's not true, because we are all humans and fallible creatures, and so as humans, we all have a certain amount of cognitive dissonance where what we believe does not really feed through into the way we act. And so you can see it in the medical world when, people know that smoking causes cancer, but they still smoke. And they know if they eat sweets, it might lead to obesity, but they still eat sweets. And the same is true when you're encouraging people to change their behavior with sustainability. So just showing people graphs and figures and pictures of polar bears on ice caps will only get you so far. You really need to overcome that cognitive dissonance we all have. So I think my advice would be understanding when you're talking to people about sustainability, understand where they're coming from and what drives them, and use their language to speak to them. So if it's a business situation and you're trying to demonstrate the case study the benefits for a case study to show the business benefits of sustainability. When you're talking to the chief financial officer, you might be wanting to talk about risk and the financial benefits. But if you're talking to the marketing person, there's a different way of speaking to them to get them to engage with you. So understand who you're speaking to, understand what drives them if you want to be successful in changing behavior and mindsets.
Brilliant. And how do you run legacy, and from an environmental point of view, do you carbon footprint your organization? Do you have an environmental management program?
We do. As we also organise events, I think that's really important so we understand the practical issues. So we've come up with 9 themes at Legacy, 9 themes of sustainability that we try and weave into everything we do. And they cover the big issues like energy and carbon and waste and transport for events, but they also cover community and ecology and water use, which often gets left out of the story. So for all of our events, we assess them against our 9 themes to make sure we're doing everything we can against those themes. And they're on our website. You can take a look on the Legacy website. In terms of carbon footprinting, we do, to an extent, we find that footprinting can often be a bit of a double-edged sword in the events industry, because the carbon footprint can be so high from people traveling to events that it can be off-putting to clients who want to change their behavior. And also, and this isn't specifically related to events, there's a tendency to just jump straight to carbon offsetting when you present someone with a carbon footprint. And we don't think that's a helpful solution. So yeah, we're a little bit reluctant of only talking about carbon footprints when we're talking to our clients. We want to talk about sustainability in the holistic sense and what that client organization can do particularly, rather than offsetting.
That's really, it's really interesting actually. That's I don't know if you've listened to some of the shows before, but we've got fairly strong views on offsetting per se, in the fact that it's kind of academically proven they don't work. So we believe categorically, if you have a high carbon footprint, you need to be reducing in line with the 2050 real net zero, and you may have to change your business model, and it may be really hard to do. And there is a roadmap that you can do to that. And
absolutely,
it's not as actually frightening. In most instances, it's not as frightening as you potentially think it. But what I find really interesting with what you've just said is, because we have Compare Footprint, the carbon footprinting software, and we think, but clearly very similarly to you, I don't know, I just find that really
one of the trade-offs of sustainability, isn't it? You need to have the data, but you don't want to encourage people to take that data and then take the easy way out.
I hadn't actually thought about it like that, but it's kind of glaringly obvious when you've just said it to me. I'll certainly take that away from this conversation and take it back to the team and talk to them about how do we disseminate that. And because I think you're right, if you calculated something in your mind, you want to minus it, and that it may not, it's not the right way.
Yeah, and we find humanizing it is really powerful as well. So once you've given someone that number, the natural instinct, like I said, is to try and offset it. But also, if you present a carbon footprint, no one really, except for people like me, knows what a ton of carbon is in real life. So if you present it in a way that relates to a relatable object, so there's a graphic that's quite famous where it shows a ton of carbon in a balloon filled with air is the size of a balloon that's about 80 centimeters in diameter, which instantly gives you a model to relate to. It's the size of so many buses stacked up, or so many White Houses. And using those kind of frame of references, I think, speaks to people when they're talking about how they personally can reduce their impact, as opposed from a number, which doesn't mean much to them, as opposed from what comes out of a calculator.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so how do we find out more about you and connect with you and come and talk to you?
Come talk to me. Love talking to people. We all do, in person and online. So we have a website, legacy-events.com. We're about to launch a new product as well, which we're really excited about, called the Legacy Marketplace, and that's at legacymarketplace.co.uk, and that connects people organising events with suppliers, sustainable events suppliers and organisers, just to make it easy and hassle-free and seamless, the process of organising an online and in-person event sustainably. So come and see us on the Legacy Marketplace. Come to our launch on the 13th of April, so in about 3 weeks' time. And also, we're all over social media and on LinkedIn as well. So please connect with me on LinkedIn or follow Legacy on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, what we'll do is I will ask Christina and Lib to promote the 13th of April. Sadly, you're probably listening to this and it will be after the 13th of April. So hopefully you'll have seen it in our social media channels, and so we'll promote it that way. All right. Thank you so much for being on today. I've definitely really enjoyed myself, and I feel a lot more, I feel a lot more knowledgeable about events now and where we're going and what we're doing. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. And I love to talk about this subject. Anyone who knows me knows I'll talk about sustainable events till I'm shut up. So please do ask me about sustainability and events anytime. And to your listeners as well, please do
Awesome.
ask me any questions you have.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our Sustainable Business podcast. If you want to learn more about sustainable business and talk to other like-minded professionals, apply to join to our online community at sustainabilitysolve.org. Join now and find a space for you to collaborate, learn and inspire others to become more environmental. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to follow Green Element on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram.
So you really enjoy sustainability and want to be a part of the solution? Come and join our vibrant community now. Book a call and we can talk more.